We're speaking with David Pietrusza. He's the author of many books. You can find his website at davidpietrusza.com. You can also find his books at Amazon.com, Barnes & Nobles, and all of your major outlets. He's written several books, including Silent Cal's Almanac that I've just been enjoying, the homespun wit and wisdom of Vermont's Calvin Coolidge, and as you mentioned, David, 1920, the year of the six presidents, another very interesting book. And today we're talking about 1960, LBJ versus JFK versus Nixon, the epic campaign that forged three presidencies. Now, in this book, you talk about the very famous Kennedy-Nixon presidential debates. Is that right?
Absolutely. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the first debate, September 26, 1960. And this is something that really changes presidential politics. They have to invent the format, really, because, you could go all the way back to Lincoln Douglas in 1856, but, they're not going to stump around Illinois talking on one topic for 4 hours.
Yeah.
They could point to 1948, which was Dewey and Stassen, but who wants to have Dewey and Stassen as historical precedents? They went on the radio during the Oregon primary. As 1960 was the year of three presidents, in a way, it was the year of three debates, because you had a debate between Kennedy and Humphrey in West Virginia. Kennedy didn't want to debate, but he was kind of behind the eight ball in West Virginia. It was an incredibly dull debate, which is why no one remembers it. And then they had a debate of sorts at the Democrat convention, which was JFK versus LBJ. JFK just smoked LBJ in a very short, brief thing. And then I think that gave him the confidence to go on to debate Nixon. Nixon should have won. He was a skilled debater, and JFK was still untested. But in that first debate, it was pretty much Kennedy. In the first half of it, really, it was his all the way. Nixon sort of comes back, and he really comes back in the last three debates, but it's that first debate that everyone remembers, and it's the one that gives JFK credibility and, shall we say, gravitas as a leader, which, based on his Senate experience and career, really, he was kind of a lightweight.
Well, and we had this new technology, the television. People were seeing these candidates in a new way. It wasn't just an ambiguous voice coming through the radio, or the occasional where people would go and see them speak live. Here, many people were seeing them in these television debates, and I've seen that debate. And Nixon, like you said, very skilled debater, but he sort of looked like Night of the Living Dead in person, in that he seemed very drained, looked haggard. You hear this today in presidential debates. They'll say the candidate looked tired. He looked like he had a 5 o'clock shadow. He really looked, compared to JFK.
Yeah, Nixon's 5 o'clock shadow on TV always looked like an 8 o'clock shadow. And one of JFK's aides afterwards said he looked like an escaped convict, sort of like David Jansen in The Fugitive. It was the first. In reviewing those videos on YouTube, when I saw them for my research, it was like at times I burst out laughing. At Nixon's shiftiness. It was like David Little doing a Richard Nixon impersonation. It was very, very bad. Then he kind of got together. He was ill. He had injured himself. He had tired himself out. He had lost a lot of weight. The makeup factor was a factor. His clothes hung on him. He chose the wrong wardrobe. He blended into the background with a gray suit on a gray background, and then black and white TV. It made him look even more washed out. The reason why they're sitting and then have to go up to the podium each time is because Nixon's knee was still bad from the knee he was hospitalized on just a few weeks before. He was running 103-degree fever just a few nights before when he addressed, I think, the Carpenters Union in St. Louis, and he refused to prep for it. He knew everything. He was the one-man band. Jack Kennedy sat together with his advisors, got to Chicago a couple days before so he wouldn't, look like some guy who just came off the campaign trail. Nixon did just come off the campaign trail, and it all added up to, a decision, JFK.
So in some ways, for Nixon, it wasn't just sickness, but a combination of maybe sickness and a little bit of arrogance that made him come off bad?
Arrogance in one way in terms of preparation, and then obsequiousness in those first 18 minutes where he's agreeing with JFK. JFK is putting forward the differences between the parties, and there's a big Democratic enrollment edge and a carryover from the New Deal. Dwight Eisenhower's presidency is kind of a fluke, and Nixon faces a big deficit in terms of millions of votes when he starts the campaign. JFK knows this. In every speech he gives, he points out he's a Democrat. and he challenges Nixon in that debate and says, I represent the party of Franklin Roosevelt and Truman and Wilson, and Mr. Nixon represents the party of Harding and Coolidge, and I represent the TVA and Social Security. And they asked Nixon what he says about that, and he says, I have no comment. Right. He's sort of like a Fifth Amendment Republican at that point. It is just stupefying. And eventually he ramps it back up, and he really takes it to JFK in the later debates. But that first debate is like a textbook case of how not to do it. And so much of the debates later on are the one-liners, the appearance, the physical appearance of people, what they look like, how they project themselves. It really is a triumph of glit and sound bites over substance. It's unfortunate, but we're kind of stuck with it. Again, history shows we didn't have to. There were no subsequent presidential debates until 1976. Part of that was, would you have a sitting president subjected to that? And we kind of put presidents more on a pedestal back then, and it was like, is this right to grill in this way? Might he blurt something out that he shouldn't as the head of state? And then finally Gerald Ford is in A, not elected, and B, in a really deep hole versus Carter, and he agrees to debate Carter, and that's how it starts up again. And you see again where he blunders, Ford does with that, Poland is not Soviet dominated, that kind of nonsense.
Right.
And you see I won't hold Mr. Mondale's age against him, or I knew Jack Kennedy and you're no Jack Kennedy. Those moments tend to define everything, and for good or ill. But it is good to focus. The good thing is that it focuses so much of the public on getting the back and forth between the candidates, which they might zone out the rest of the time. So it's good and it's bad.
It's very, very interesting, and there's no doubt you can see a domino effect through these three presidents, LBJ, JFK, and Nixon, and how that affected further people like Ford and others. I'm getting an IM. People are asking me whether or not you know that during the Kennedy-Nixon debate, whether or not they had teleprompter technology at this time, or were people just free-willing it off their notes and what they had in their brain?
Oh, no, they weren't allowed to use notes. And I think the second or third debate, Nixon accuses Kennedy, I think it's the third debate, of using notes. Oh, yes, it would be the third, because they didn't use a split screen. They did use a split screen because they were on different coasts. There was a scheduling problem. Nixon was in Los Angeles. Kennedy was in New York. And they say, hey, wait a minute, that guy's using notes. And the rules were you would not have notes. It would be completely off the cuff. Wow. And Jack Kennedy was accused of doing that in debate number 3. So no teleprompters, no notes, nothing scribbled on your palm of your hand or anything like that.
No Palin moment. Well, I tell you what.
No Palin, no magic teleprompters.
I don't know how today's politicians would survive forums like that. Now, you were talking about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I don't think they could survive those 3 and 4 hour debates as well. But even here, now you're being scrutinized, not simply by people that are going to read the transcripts later or people that are at the events, but now people across the nation, across the world are watching on television. And the split screen, again, the idea that someone may be watching you as you're making facial expressions as you're listening to someone else, a lot of dynamics that had not been tested, had not been tried, that the speakers would not know the effect until later, after the fact. Very interesting dynamics taking place.
There was a question about that, the so-called reaction shots. And Don Hewitt, the creator of 60 Minutes, was the director of he was in the control booth for the first debate. And they went to a lot of reaction shots for Nixon. And Nixon's looked uniformly bad, DR's eyes darting around, sweating. JFK was studiously jotting down notes and stuff. And so you got a battle in the control room as to whether you would have the reaction shots and what they would show. Now, like C-SPAN doesn't allow reaction shots. So you're going to see the guy in Congress, the one speaker talking. You're not going to see the guy 2 desks behind him falling asleep. Okay, and there's something to be said for each thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, it can be manipulated. Yeah, sure.